Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to CRAM. Thanks for joining me as we explore new, innovative research and big ideas that may change the way you think and act. One of Canada's most popular big thinkers comes from the world of science fiction. Robert Sawyer has written 25 novels and many other works which have captivated audiences with their exploration of alternate worlds. He's the only Canadian to have won all three top international awards for science fiction, the Nebula, the Hugo, and the John W. Campbell Memorial Award. His scope of imagination has included life and death on Mars, robots with human consciousness, a parallel Earth with a dramatically different way of life, and many more thought-provoking scenarios. Who better to talk about our world as we face challenges like never before? Welcome, Robert.
Hi, Mary. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us. The world right now is in the throes of another variant, Omicron. In your opinion, is this a game changer?
I don't think Omicron per se is a game changer, but we're working our way through the Greek alphabet pretty rapidly. I think the idea that this thing mutates on a regular basis is the game changer that we thought initially when this whole thing was announced as a pandemic more than a year and a half ago. There was COVID-19 full stop period, one virus that we were fighting. And the thing about viruses is that they do change, they do mutate. So we thought, at the public consciousness, I'm sure the virologists knew this, but in the public consciousness, we thought, okay, there's a definable enemy, the way there was with smallpox, for instance. There was a definable enemy, a proper vaccine will exterminate it. Job done, we move on with our lives. Well, the reality is that this is a very fungible, changeable disease. And we're at Omicron now. Let's see. Pi is next. Pi is going to be the next variant. And then Rho after that. And we're going to be dealing with these into 2022, 2023, it may just be a fact of life the way the flu has become a fact of life. Every year you get a specific for what we think is a specific vaccination for what we think is going to be the dominant variant of the influenza virus that we deal with each year.
So what does this mean about the term post-pandemic?
Well, it's an aspirational term, right? Like post-holiday dieting and all that kind of New Year's resolutions. We all have good intentions. Will we ever enter a post-pandemic period? I had great faith in humanity when we started this. I thought everybody would vax up. Everybody would socially distance. Everybody would pay attention to the science and the scientists. And what we've seen in varying degrees around the world, depending on what country, and even in that picayune granularity they do in the United States, what state you look at, very different response rates to common sense precautions. And so we're dealing now with Omicron raging across the globe because we didn't nip this in the bud when we were back at alpha, beta, gamma, or delta variant. Will there be a post-pandemic period? I still hold out hope. We're vaccinating, tens of thousands of people every day in the province of Ontario where I live. Hundreds of thousands or even millions worldwide every day. Maybe people will finally, as they they're about to lose another holiday season to this thing. Maybe people will finally wake up and address the challenge, and we will get a post-pandemic world, but not in 2023, not in 2022, and quite possibly not until 2023, and then only if we play by the rules.
I remember speaking with you when we were about 5 months into this pandemic, and there was a phrase you said that struck me at the time, and you said, "This is the age of the introvert."
Yes.
Do you think that still holds true?
Well, here I am. You're at home right now. I think I'm at home right now for sure. Nobody here except, me and my wife, and it's not going out has become the mode that makes sense. And for a lot of people who were disenfranchised by our previous lifestyle, who felt very uncomfortable with crowds, even, excuse me, even with working conditions where they had to go to an office. And, part of the reason people say they love going to work is the socialization. If you're an extrovert, if you're gregarious, you'd love that. If you're an introvert, if you're somebody who likes peace and quiet and a little being alone, a little solitary existence, that was actually a very unpleasant existence. So the tables have turned, and those who thrive in what we've now are calling lockdown are actually enjoying life much better than those of us who miss all of that human connection.
Yeah, I mean, but you're an extrovert and I'm an extrovert.
Yeah.
What does this mean for people then like us who are extroverts?
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, I miss my friends. I had, last weekend, I had 2 friends over, of course, doubly vaxxed, and one of them wore a mask during the entire visit because he teaches karate to children. And he said, I'm doubly vaxxed, I passed the test, but I'm also exposed to a lot of little disease vectors that we call kids. And so we took precautions. But as I said to my wife, I was looking forward to that. Like we'd planned it for weeks. And when it was, human contact, people other than each other, right? And I'm lucky because there is an each other. I have friends who live alone, who are by nature gregarious and are finding this, to be a hell for them, right? One man's heaven, one woman's heaven, one person's heaven is another person's heaven or hell. And so the tables have flipped, and you and I are in a kind of hell, and some other people are enjoying a kind of heaven, but none of us are happy about the reasons for this, obviously.
Yeah. I wonder too, though, about the time factor. And the longer we stay in this and the longer we do have to stay at home and isolate or just be careful about being around others, whether that's something we, even extroverts, become used to.
Yes.
And it almost can become a default. It's that cocooning. Oh, it's safe. It's comfortable. It's easy. I feel lazy. Do you know what I mean? I'm wondering whether it's changing us a bit.
More than just that. I've lived through some changes because I'm a man. And when I was a young man, men didn't hug. Right. And now when my friends come, and these 2 friends who came over were 2 men, 2 fellow science fiction writers. Normally I would give them a big hug. Right. This is a change in male. I think we always wanted that physical contact, but we were no. But now we do that. And now, no, we don't. And the handshake, which has been a traditional gesture of course, friendly greeting, that should fall by the wayside. It has always been a way of transferring germs. Now, me as a science fiction writer, I think the Vulcan salute, live long and prosper, which is what, got to have your thumb out there, Mary.
Oh, sorry, the thumb out.
The thumb is out for the Vulcans, so we all got to learn that. The thumb out is the easy part. It's this that people have trouble with, the separating of the fingers, right? But the Vulcan salute, live long and prosper, which we're all hoping to do in these parlous times, is, I think, a very good greeting. But yeah, we're going to be less. And, it's interesting how social changes come in pairs, because we've also moved a great deal away from any casual physical contact in the workplace that might have been construed as inappropriate from a sexual or a power dynamic point of view. At the same time, we're moving away from casual contact as a way of transmitting germs. So it's funny to me how these things come in pairs. It's the same phenomenon that's giving us right now, the rise of Black Lives Matter and trans identity rights at the same time as we're dealing with a pandemic, because there's a realization that there's going to be a hitting of a reset switch, that society will come out differently. And so all of those who have very valid agendas that have not been forwarded in the old paradigm are saying, well, if we're going to hit the reset switch, let's hit it on equality, as well as hitting it on the way we look after our physical health and mental health coming to the fore as a topic of dialogue too.
So do you see that happening partly because the pandemic, I mean, the very nature of the pandemic is so disruptive that it creates like more of an optimum situation for all kinds of things to evolve, to revolutionize, to change?
That's right. And, as I say to some of my younger friends who, oh, this is horrible. I said, my parents lived through World War II, right? And my grandparents lived through World War I. This is nothing in a sense compared to what they lived to. But you look at World War II as an example and women in the workplace. Prior to World War II, there weren't women in the workplace. Well, when the men were sent overseas or wherever, the women entered the workplace and they said after World War II, hey, you know what? We're not going back. There was a societal shift that had nothing to do with defeating the forces of fascism and Nazism in Europe, but came as a concomitant, came alongside with it. And there was a realization at the end that there is a big reset switch after a world war or after a global pandemic, and things don't have to go back on a social level to the way they were prior to that.
Yeah, so let's talk about the world of work. How do you see that permanently changing because of the pandemic?
It is going to permanently change. We've seen over the last several weeks, many big companies and governments say, you know what, we told you to come back to work after New Year's or whatever. No, we're not going to ask you to do that because, two things happen. One is, of course, we're dealing with a pandemic that's nowhere near its end, and people thought it would be. Give it 6 weeks of a circuit breaker lockdown and all will be good. Well, that's not turned out to be the case. But B, more significantly, is that employers have discovered that employees don't slack off at home. They don't, just clock in and do nothing. They actually are as productive or more productive, and in many, many cases, not all, but many, as happy or more happy to not have to fight rush hour traffic, to not arrive at work already with road rage, to be able to, spread their 8 hours that they might owe their employer out over 12 or 13 hours of being awake while also having some quality time with spouse or with a child or pet.
But many workers, many workers, though, they're not happy being totally at home and they want some kind of a hybrid form, right?
And a hybrid makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is always our problem in our world of the last, let's say, 6 or 8 years. Politically, everything has been a dichotomy. You're either all this or you're all that. And we've forgotten that there's shades of gray. I have a friend who, even before the pandemic, she works for a small, like less than a dozen employees, fewer than a dozen employees. I don't want to get letters from the English professors, fewer than a dozen employees.
Thank you for self-correcting.
That's right. That has always been a home-based business, done through, video conferencing, and they have a website, blah, blah, blah. And nonetheless, even before the pandemic, the boss insisted on quarterly team building, face-to-face getaway weekends, right? So that it wouldn't just be, oh yeah, I know so-and-so, she's at the other end of the video screen, but I don't really know anything about her kids or about, her hobbies or anything like that. She's just pixels to me, not a person. Make them a person and make sure there is that interactivity, and it's something to look forward to where you see it's like a reunion, like a family reunion.
And also, don't you think, I mean, there are, of course, social benefits. You become closer to your colleagues, maybe your boss as well. Don't you think it also creates some kind of perhaps loyalty? I mean, if you're never seeing, right? If you're never seeing anybody or your boss or whatever, what kind of, loyalty or stake do you have in that company?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And it works both ways, by the way. I have a family member who just got dismissed by a company that she'd been working for a long time. Boom, there goes the loyalty, right? On both ends. You and I have both spent a lot of time, you more than me, at the CBC Broadcasting Center. That's a place. There's an environment, an atmosphere, a collegiality, and a symbol, this great big symbol of what it means to be a public broadcaster in Canada. And that does engender a mindset and a loyalty, not just to the boss, but to the institution. If everything is done at home, my institution is my living room right now, right? And there is no going to work. There is no office. So yes, of course, psychologically, there's not nearly that level of loyalty. There's no doubt that countries raise flags to provide a symbol. We say rally around the flag in the same way we rally around the physical construct that is the shared place of work. And it engenders the same kind of, we don't call it patriotism when it's related to the office, but it definitely is a form of loyalty. Human beings are built to have loyalty to physical objects.
Yeah, no, this kind of huge ongoing experiment is fascinating, right? To see what the repercussions are and what the outcomes will be. It also makes me wonder, and maybe this is in the realm of science fiction, but if we can enable the virtual experience to be more and more like the in-person experience, right? So now I'm thinking about VR. And so that maybe you sign into a meeting and you actually are there. Like you feel as if you're there with everyone. It's a 3D experience. I mean, how far away are we from that, Robert? What do you think?
Well, technically, we're not far away at all. As my friend William Gibson, a fellow science fiction writer out in Vancouver, says, the future is already here. It's just not widely distributed yet. There are VR fully immersive experiences that you can go to see at VR labs, at universities, at companies that are doing this. Right now, the barrier for most people is that home VR requires wearing a headset, which seems, now you and I are wearing a kind of headset right now that we become completely oblivious to, right? In fact, you, I'm sure, have had the same experience I have, which is where are my glasses? Oh, they're on my face, right? Become totally unaware of the fact that you're wearing a headset. Well, still, we've got these massive Oculus Rift things and so forth right now that even just physically weigh you down. They draw your chin to your chest. They're so heavy. That will be obviated as time goes by. And the headset, if one is needed at all, will be no more obtrusive than these are. And then, yes, you will, I won't be, when I want to talk to anybody at the meeting, I have to make sure I'm looking in my camera right now, because otherwise it's not the meeting at all. It's my living room. There's my Christmas tree, for instance. It'll be, oh yeah, Mary's over here, but Sarah's over here, and Fred's over here, and John's behind me, and so forth, and Abdul is over there. And it'll be 360, immersive, and much more congenial to interactivity that way.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking of as well is, an experience that even the sensory part of it, even maybe the smell, or there's a sort of tactile component, it will be that real. I don't know when that.
Absolutely. Yeah. They call it tactile, or in computing, they often call it haptics.
Right.
The
haptics.
Sense of touch and feeling feedback. The most primitive version of that, but you still see, is in some amusement park rides where you're not really going anywhere, but the chair vibrates and you feel that you are having forward movement. They fake elevators at Disney World like that, where you think you're going up to another level and really just the floor of the thing is vibrating, and then the back door opens and you think you've ascended or descended. You haven't really. All of that technology is reasonably mature in laboratories and at companies that develop these things, and will within a few years be mainstream technology in our homes.
A few years. Okay, that's not far along.
I don't want to go off color here, but there's a whole field called teledildonics, which deals with sex aids that are remote controlled by Bluetooth for people who are having long distance relationships, so that you can, interact. And I hear tell about these things being very effective at providing a level of haptic or tactile experience that, they say this is true about everything, that pornography drove, high definition video on the internet, that that all of these things are very much at the front and center of driving our connectivity. And this field of teledildonics really does exist.
I mean, I don't think that seems so crazy. I mean, a basic, like something so basic as sex, why wouldn't it be driving all this? Right. Why wouldn't it be?
You look at the human, the basic human drives of sex and shelter and food.
Right.
And look at how food has changed, right? With the rise of Skip the Dishes and Uber Eats and their competitors. And, every restaurant now, even fine dining restaurants that, would have disdained delivery, every restaurant that wants to be in business at all during the pandemic is now a takeout and delivery joint.
Yeah. So you see, because you bring up a good point. This adoption that we've had, that the pandemic, I guess, really has forced some people or moved people along, right? The continuum, the technology continuum, to be not only using it, but more comfortable with it. Do you think that in general, there's less fear about technology? And I'm thinking even specifically AI, because there's so many concerns about AI, and I don't really hear about that as much lately.
Well, it's very interesting. For many years, AI was a scary term, right? Mm-hmm. And we avoided it. And I'm sure it's going to make a liar of me if I try and do it now. But if I say to my Alexa over here, Alexa, I love you. Oh, it's dissing me. It's not even replying. Well, I don't love you anymore, Alexa. Now it's over. Forget that teledildonics.
It's because you're talking to me. Rob, you're talking to me. She doesn't like that. She doesn't.
But when I said, recently, when you say I love you to Alexa, it would have a song that said, I'll always be here, your ever trusting or trustworthy AI. Like they actually had embraced the term AI to it's no longer a dangerous term, right? We're no longer fear it the way Terminator made AI a fearful term. So people are being forced to use technologies that they never used. People who had never shopped online are shopping online. People who had never done a video call in their life and thought they never would are doing it every day.
Okay, but you know what? Is that necessarily a good or bad thing? Or I guess maybe it's both, because
everything is both.
Well, everything is both. Absolutely. Because those concerns that people had about AI, they haven't gone away. The ethical concerns, the moral concerns.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And I just, as you and I happen to be talking, just yesterday, the Los Angeles Times did an op-ed about Tesla and their self-driving cars, saying in California, Tesla basically says to the Department of Motor Vehicles that, well, our self-driving cars aren't really self-driving cars. They require an alert, experienced, engaged driver behind the wheel. On the other hand, they're marketing as a $10,000 upgrade package. If you buy a Tesla, you can buy it with the self-driving option. So, they're kind of misleading the regulator, because the regulator, if they said they were self-driving, there are regulations that govern that on the roads in California that other car makers are being bound by. But they're saying to the customer, no, it's a self-driving car. So we have this deliberate attempt, I think, in my personal opinion, to bypass any oversight by, now the DMV is not a big part of government oversight, but it is, driver's license and so forth, to bypass any oversight. Almost all artificial intelligence research is done at universities. Now, it used to be that universities were wide open, but these days they're all doing contracts for corporations and have signed non-disclosure agreements. Or artificial intelligence research, by far the biggest doer of it, is the military, and they never have to disclose to the public what's going on. So AI research is bypassing the kind of regulatory oversight that, say, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States or Health Canada in Canada provides over, say, the pharmaceutical industry. And yet AI is orders of magnitude potentially more dangerous than, even the opioid epidemic we've had of people, bypassing and ignoring the regulations that should be in place.
Well, that's really worrying.
For that class of drugs.
It
is worrying. We should be worried. This is why science fiction, why I still do what I do, why it's an important art form an important part of the discourse on these issues because we are not bound by non-disclosure agreements. I like to say science fiction is the WikiLeaks of science. We get out into the public discourse all the possible, yes, the upsides for sure. We like science and technology, but all the downsides too of all of these things that are on the horizon.
With the way things are moving, I mean, the speed of these advancements, it's remarkable. And especially during the pandemic, as things are really moving quickly. In the past, you've spoken about the God of the gaps, right? How we as humans fill that void when there's no scientific answer to something. It could be religion, perhaps it could be superstition or maybe fate to explain the unexplainable. Right. Do you think those gaps, are they increasing or decreasing as science progresses?
Ultimately, they're decreasing. Every new discovery poses a whole bunch of other questions. Like, for instance, 100 years ago, we thought we knew, well, let's say 1,000 years ago, we thought we knew what the universe was made of: earth, air, water, and fire. In the last 100 years, pretty much in the last 75 years, we discovered, only that recently, that we discovered the neutron, one of the three fundamental constituents of an atom. We knew about protons, we knew about electrons. Oh, there's another one, the neutron. Okay. And then we discovered that atoms break down into smaller and smaller things, quarks, and quarks break down into vibrating things, if we believe in string theory, and so on and so forth. So every time there's a new question, and now we say, oh, we thought we'd solve what matter was made of, and then there's dark matter. And most of the universe is made of dark matter or dark energy, the nature of which we have no idea of. So there are all kinds of questions that those people studying physics right now as an undergraduate and then ultimately as graduate students will solve. We don't believe, the fundamental mind shift is we no longer believe, generally speaking, in our enlightened age, that the gaps are inherently
Why do we not think
unfillable.
that? Why do we think they're...
We used to believe... Because every time we've stared at a gap long
but there
enough,
are more
we've
gaps,
managed
though.
to fill it in.
You're saying there are more questions.
There are more gaps. Of course, there are more questions, but ultimately, we don't think there's, we being scientifically minded people, don't think there are an infinite number of questions. Albert Einstein died not fulfilling his lifelong dream, which was a theory of everything. We call it or GUT, we sometimes call it the Grand Unified Theory, GUT, GUT, or the theory of everything, TOE. That's the holy grail, so to speak, to put a religious spin on it, of modern physics, that a handful of equations will eventually describe everything in the universe, and a finite number of fundamental constituents will define everything in the universe. Most, I would say almost all scientists believe that both the number of equations or fundamental parameters or things you need in terms of writing down an explanation of the universe is finite and indeed not very big, and that ultimately the number of constituents of the universe is finite and indeed not very big.
And do you believe that?
I absolutely believe that.
And how close are we to that theory of everything?
You know, science moves at an almost exponential rate once it gets going. So are we going to have it this week? No. Are we going to have it this year, 2022? No. Are we going to have it this decade? Even money. Are we going to have it before the end of this century? Absolutely.
And what might that look like?
Well, you know, there are those partisans of the theory of everything that say that it actually does lean towards a description that implies that there was an intelligent designer behind the universe. And there are those who say, no, it does not. You know, we already know that there are only four fundamental forces that govern the universe. One of them is the strength of gravity. Gravity is one of the four fundamental forces. Electromagnetic force, the weak and strong nuclear forces are the other two. So if gravity were a little bit stronger than it actually is after the Big Bang, which did indeed happen, there would have been an immediate big crunch. Things, you know, just like you throw something up in the air and it comes down and hits you on the head, right? Gravity has a certain strength. It happens to have insufficient strength so that even after 14 billion years, the things that were thrown out by the Big Bang are still throwing out, expanding more and more. If it had a little more than it did, only a little more, that we would have collapsed back to nothing very quickly. So there are those of a spiritual bent of mind who say, well, why does gravity? We will describe it for sure. We will have all the equations. But why does gravity have that almost magical value that allows a universe to expand and continue to grow instead of being a little strong and it collapses, or too weak and nothing coalesces? If gravity was a little bit weaker than the value it actually has, which is 9.8 meters per second squared on Earth, if it was a little bit weaker, the sun never would have coalesced out of a gaseous cloud of hydrogen. There wouldn't have been enough attractive force to make the sun, and out of the sun and the leftovers of the creation of the sun, the planets, and out of the leftovers of the planetary gook, us, right? It just wouldn't have happened. So we have, you can have, at the end of all of this, you can still have a spiritual interpretation if that's your bent of mind, and you can have an absolutely atheistic interpretation if that's your bent of mind.
See, so that makes me wonder, I mean, even if people did come up with this so-called theory of everything, could it be kind of anticlimactic in that we have it, but it's not like it's fully agreed on by everyone. Some people might not, and then there are different interpretations of it. So then what? Do you know what I mean? It's not like total agreement.
That's right. Human beings are, we will never be purebred Vulcans, to go back to the Vulcan salute, purely creatures of logic and rationality. We will always have our emotional, and for many, a very significant part of their life, a spiritual side that will say, yeah, that's all well and good, but I interpret it this way. And so much the better, right? Take another Star Trek metaphor. We're way better off being what we are now, 7, and what we will be 8, 9, 10 billion human beings by the time we do have the theory of everything with 10 billion viewpoints than the Star Trek concept of the Borg, where everybody is subsumed into a single collective with one viewpoint.
Robert, we could talk about so many other aspects of the human condition and science fiction in your writing, but I just want to end off and ask you, how do you think you're different today from the writer that you were 25 novels ago? Well,
that's a very good question. Like everybody, I've gone through 30 years now of living. I'm an older person. I think I was always a tolerant person. And we use tolerance today to talk about diversity. But I'm more and I've always been tolerant of diversity. I live in Toronto, the most diverse city in the world. But I've always been tolerant of that kind of diversity, but intellectual diversity. For instance, you may have heard of me being very kind to people who have a spiritual belief that I, as an atheist, don't have, that I simply don't have. But I'm, instead of saying, oh, you benighted fools, as I might have said 30 years ago, I say, you know what? All my male cousins are colorblind. That's a reality. They cannot see the full spectrum of colors I see. But when I tell them I can discern a difference between red and green, in fact, they look like opposites to me, then, oh, come on, you're making that up. That's bull. They say, oh, I guess I'm missing out on something. And my attitude much more these days is along those lines. When somebody says to me, I feel the spiritual, the numinous, this larger sense of being, and I say, I guess I'm colorblind in that regard. And rather than being dismissive, I'm much more inclusive of a wider variety of human mindsets than I ever was before.
This has been a fascinating discussion, Robert. Thank you so much for joining us, and all the best to you in 2022.
Absolutely. Let's hope this is a much better year than 2021 was. Live long and prosper,
Live long
Mary.
and prosper. Thank you, Robert.
My pleasure. Take care.
Robert Sawyer, he is one of Canada's most popular and prolific science fiction writers. His most recent book is The Oppenheimer Alternative, and he's working on a new 6-part series for Audible on our post-pandemic world. It's called The Downloaded, and it will be out in the fall of 2022. For more information on Robert Sawyer, you can check out our show notes. Thanks for joining us.